Good day and welcome to SpotLight, a series brought to you by Canada's largest international media development organization, Journalists for Human Rights, through its program to mobilize media in the fight against COVID-19 in partnership with Media Monitoring Africa and Sound Africa. I am JD Ramalapa. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in such a way that respects and enhances the freedoms of others. Those are the words of South Africa's first democratically elected president, Nelson Mandela. They are words I hope can help us to reflect and reorient our thinking as we launch into this third installment in a series of online conversations putting a spotlight on the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in South Africa. Are we living in such a way that respects and enhances other people's freedoms? Are you? So in the past 2 weeks, we have had conversations with journalists and activists on the ground who's told stories of how COVID-19 is having a largely negative impact on human rights in the country. In the first episode, we focused on the right to sufficient water in Limpopo province. And in the second episode, we focused on the right to employment for informal traders in Johannesburg Central Business District. Today, we are going to continue this conversation by putting a spotlight on the right to food. The right to food is a human right recognized under national and international law. It protects the right of human beings to access food and feed themselves, either by producing their own food or buying it. The right to food is linked to the right to life, health, and dignity. It requires that food be available and accessible and adequate for everyone without discrimination at all times. For more on this topic, we will speak to one of our journalists, Tumelo Dibakwane from the Mpumalanga Newshorn, who's working on a feature story focusing on the plight of undocumented migrants in South Africa, particularly looking at women and children. Then we'll speak to Simphiwe Zwane from the Community Organizing Working Group of Gauteng, who will give us more insight into how many people have lost the ability to feed themselves as a result of COVID-19 and its various restrictions. Welcome to Spotlight for you both. Let me start with you, Tumelo. You have been following the story of undocumented migrants who are living in a state of limbo, essentially, as a result of COVID. Why was this story important for you to tell right now?
Thank you, Ted. The story was important to me after I've realized that these guys, they were undocumented immigrants, how they are treated, then how, when they need to maybe get registered once they're in our country. Imagine if someone they are trying to run away from their country with a tourism visa so that they can get to South Africa. So you've been in South Africa for 15 years, but you are still unregistered or undocumented. Now there are kids involved that's supposed to go to school, go to varsity. They can't even go back to their country to be registered because they're not old enough. Because you can't register someone who's already 18 years old. So I had a challenge with that one once. I've met these guys. Some of them, they are my colleagues. I work with them. They're undocumented, but they've been here for some time. So when they go to Home Affairs, I'm worried with officials from the Home Affairs, because when you ask them such questions, why this guy, I am not assisting them. Some of the officials, they don't even know which office that must go and knock so that they can be assisted. Some they are not even aware that there is an office in Pretoria that deals with immigrants. Then they'll just tell them that we don't know what to do. So being someone who's in my village, this take from the deep rural areas of Mpumalanga, where these people, where these immigrants were staying with them, they are our neighbors, they are our brothers. Now they had to make means for a living. Now there are police watchers and them asking for bribes. Imagine if you are owning a small saloon, the police come and say, give me a lunch of 200. How much are you making in the shop? And then if you know that not going to give that police that 200, and they will tell you that they will arrest you. And some they are even afraid to be arrested because they will take them to Lindelani, they will wait and wait forever there. And then even when you get there, you have to bribe, I guess, so that they can release you back to your village. Now they take you to Lindelani, you must travel again to back to Mpumalanga on a man that is not available. So some, they've ended up being the one that I spoke to, they are now selling their boat. Some they're selling their body, they are sex workers. Let me use that. They are sex workers in Joburg, some they're sex workers here in Nelspruit. And now here in Nelspruit, they're even fighting territories. If you are from outside South Africa, you're supposed to go to a spot where there are no customers. And then only South Africans are allowed to work where there's customers. Then if you're foreigners now, they are working with police who come and collect money from this very, very person, but they are not collecting from the South African, but they are collecting from all the undocumented immigrants. So those who are documented, at least they are safe because they cannot collect money to them. That's why I'm telling this story, especially for the kids who are being chased out of the school because they are not, they don't have papers.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tumelo, for expanding on this. But can you tell us, so this sounds like these people were living like this before COVID-19 came. So how did COVID-19 make the migrants' lives more?
Come again?
How did COVID-19 make the
Come
lives?
again?
How did COVID-19 make the lives of the migrants more difficult than they already were?
It's now it's worse. It's worse than before because the one that I spoke to, some they can't even now maybe do some because of the restrictions. I remember during the lockdown where everything was on the standstill, it was very difficult for them just to get something to eat. Maybe some of them, they're even afraid to go to those private doctors or to go to the clinic because even in the clinic, the treatment that they're getting there is not good. So yes, the clinic and other things, but once you can't have access to food, you can't have access to water, you can't have access to a shelter, then that's inhuman. But as we are saying in South Africa, everyone has a right. Now, their rights actually were violated the way, because I was maybe interacting with them. Sometimes they'll say that we have nothing. They try to go maybe to collect the boxes. Where are they going to sell it? They try to open their salon, but no one will come to their salon. And that's only the source of income that they have. So COVID-19 has impacted very, very badly to them.
Thank you, Tumelo. Yesterday, the Community Organizing Working Group, which is part of the COVID-19 People's Coalition, staged a protest in Johannesburg demanding that big groceries retailers play their part in ensuring that people's right to life, health, and food. They were saying that corporates are profiteering at the expense of the people, and that must stop. So let me turn to you, Simphiwe. What did you mean by that? How are grocery retailers profiting at the expense of people?
The reason for us to say that we saw prices going up during the pandemic or the lockdowns. So that, for an example, I'll just set an example. There was this remedy people were talking about, like your ginger and the lemon, drink ginger and lemon. We saw how expensive were lemon. We saw how expensive the ginger it was. So that tells that the food pricing were going up. And on the other hand, people were busy losing their jobs, especially the domestic workers. They had challenges where they were supposed to go to work, then they will say, go back home, we'll call you. So people lost their job during the pandemic. While on the other hand, then we had to buy food on a very high prices. And again, the retailers has made profit during the lockdown. In this case, SPAR showed a 13.5% turnover increase. And I mean, despite this, the people that they employ, so none of this profits, I mean the workers, so non-profit. And furthermore, employees of these retailers were frontliners workers. They were working, during that pandemic on a high risk, but they were not even compensated. So you can imagine that. So those were our reasons. We're saying they were making like a lot of profit, and none, even government, they didn't even consider the poor because the prices were like hiking, going up now and then, and more. We saw more people losing their jobs.
Mm. Tell me something. How are you surviving, or how are people in lower income communities surviving on a daily basis? Like, you were talking about prices going up. Can you give us like an example of how much like bread is costing these days, or milli meal, etc.?
Yes, exactly. I think milli meal will be a good example. I used to buy 12.5 with 65 rand. Today, as we speak, we buy it with 90 rand. So then that is expensive, so expensive. With this unemployment challenge, most of the people, they use child support grant money, of which I feel at the very same time is not enough to do that, to maintain people. So like for an example, where I'm staying, I had to go out risking my life for those families who cannot put anything on top of their table at the end of the day. I had to approach business people to say, here is the situation, can you assist? Then I will collect the information, and at the end of the day, if I get a quite well response from the business people, then I'll make sure that I deliver a hamper on those kind of families. So it's a challenge, and it's very sad. To make it worse, we saw the hampers that were from the government. They were given to their political affiliates or members, where you'll see people running around looking for food. Whereas on the other hand, like ourselves as the working group here in Joburg, we're saying stay at home and be safe. Then we'll find people questioning you, what will we eat? It's better for us to be killed by COVID rather than to be killed by hunger inside our houses or our homes. So it's a sad thing, and it's a challenge.
In your statement, in the statement that you released yesterday, you also mentioned that there are more and more children who are going hungry as a result of this. Can you tell us more about that? Like, how many children are going hungry in your community, for example, as a result of COVID?
There are many. Actually, when I made my research, I estimated of about 18% of eligible children who doesn't receive a grant because of lack of documentation. So that alone, it's a challenge, because you'll find at some point other families, they don't even getting that grant. So it's a challenge. It's a very sad thing, of which at some point we, like myself and the team that we're having around here at Thembelihle, will be like doing our daily job, not getting any salaries, but volunteering ourselves to help those kids. Like right now, because of the challenge that we are raising now, we're thinking of trying to open something like afternoon school, where we'll make sure that each and every day a child gets a bread for breakfast before he goes to school or she goes to school, and afternoon again, then they must come to us and get another bread. So we are still looking for sponsors. So a lot of children here in this informal settlement are sleeping like at some point without food. And you'll find them going around with the risk of being knocked by the cars, because they'll go to the nearest suburbs, knocking door to door, asking for food. Some you'll find them around malls. Now they even, some, I think they are about 10 years, 11 years, 12 years. They make something like isikirikiri, I don't know how to call it in English. And then they'll wait at malls for people who are buying groceries, taking in their groceries, and then they'll take them home so that they can be paid 10 rand at least so that they can buy bread. When you ask them, they said, no, my mother, she doesn't work. My father, I don't have a father. Then I'm going to use this money to buy bread for my family at the age of 10, 12. So this pandemic had a lot bad impact on kids.
Yeah. The right to food has its limitations, for example. It doesn't mean that that one has a right to feed oneself in dignity. You know, it doesn't mean that just because we have the right to food that government will drop off the food in our doors, but it means that government has to provide an environment that allows us to do the activities that will allow us to put food on the table. In your opinion, do you think that government has done enough to help people to be able to go back to work or do the things that they used to do before in order to earn an income and then have food on the table?
Not at all, because as I speak now, there is one family that there were 5 people who were working on it, sorry, and now only one, she's left working. The 4 lost their jobs. Still, even now, they are not working, they're not employed. Only one now left with a job. So that person needs to feed the whole family with her salary. It's a monthly salary. It's a family of 13. You can imagine. And a lot of people still that lost their jobs, still they're not working. At some point, you'll find some people like hawkers trying to sell, then the very same government will be sending metros to come and take their stuff because of tax. So on the other hand, our government has a policy that vukuzenzele. Then you ask yourself, when you are trying to do something to feed your family, then you'll be attacked by metros. So I feel that government, there's nothing that is doing concerning the rights of people. I mean, there's a section in our, I think we have a good constitution in this country, but the implementation, it's very bad when it comes to that. Yes, I heard you. You said we have a right to food, but with the reason that you stated. But Section 28 says impose a responsibility to ensure that children are equated to food. So, but none of that is happening. Like right now, people those kids were given about 500 rand. It lasted only for 6 months while we're still facing the pandemic. So you ask yourself what our government, he was thinking actually, what came to the mind to cut off that money while we still have a pandemic? The parents are no longer working, and we need that money. They needed that money so that they can buy best groceries, not even best groceries, but what they can live on at least until month end.
Tumelo, let me ask you the same question again. I mean, is government doing enough to sort of take care of this issue of undocumented migrants who are living in South Africa, trying to make a living, whose children cannot go to school because of no papers? What sort of recourse do they have in this instance? Where can they go? How can they get help? Is there a way for them to be helped?
I think our government, or my government, is failing these people with these good constitutions and laws, because the very same government is the one who's kicking them out of their school. The same government is the one who's rejecting them when they want to be registered, maybe to have asylum papers or something that they can use to get a job. The very same government is not hiring them. the very same government are using the very same police to arrest them. And then even if they get arrested and then they say we pay bribe to this certain officer, nothing will happen to that officer. So I think the government has failed the undocumented children, the government has failed the undocumented immigrants who are in South Africa, even those who run away from their countries because of the war or any other thing that might have made them to run away, but they failed them, even though there's a constitution that says they can, that says they must be protected, but they are not. Instead, they are treating them like, I don't know, animals.
Simphiwe, yesterday you handed over a list of demands to help remedy this situation. What are some of the solutions that you think should be implemented by government in order to make sure that people really fully realize their rights to have enough adequate food and health and to live in dignity?
Okay, what I'm thinking right now, if government can implement basic income grant and more food programs, and also the subsidy on a health food. Maybe when we go to buy like fruits, veggies, then we get a subsidy on that one. I think it can work. Obviously, there are more ideas that our government can implement regarding that. Like if kids can also have food at school, breakfast, and then they have their lunch at school, then I think it will be better. Though I know there are better ideas, but for now, I think those ones can assist those families who don't have anything. Can you imagine a child coming from home without breakfast to school, going to wait for lunch or 12 o'clock so that he or she can have her first meal, and coming back home, there's nothing also again. So that is why I'm saying if kids can have breakfast at schools and also have lunch at schools.
Thank you very much, Simphiwe, for your time and for sharing the story of what is happening in your community, and to you too, Tumelo, on the plight of undocumented migrant workers in your community. Thank you both for coming on. And that's all we have time for today on Spotlight, a series of conversations focusing on the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in South Africa. This series is brought to you by Journalists for Human Rights in partnership with Media Monitoring Africa and Sound Africa. You can send us an email to info@soundafrica.org or join our Facebook page for more on this and other stories we have covered. Until next week, stay safe and sound.